And we are live. Hello everyone, how are we doing on this fine Monday evening? I hope you're doing well, that you have a nice weekend and everything. I'm very happy to see you again for another interview. The interviews are back. We have the first interview of the season, this time with German MEP. Tonight our guest will be Sven Simon, who hails from the EPP, so on the right side of the hemicycle. So Sven Simon, he has been an MEP. He is an MEP actually since 2019, so that's his second mandate. He's been re-elected in 2024, last year. And today he is the chair of the Committee on Constitutional Affairs, which I will call AFCO by its acronym. But yeah, this constitutional affairs, everything related to treaties and everything, but we'll talk about that. And he is substitute in the Committee on Foreign Affairs. So before I start the conversation, as usual, a small reminder of the rules for anybody who would be new with us tonight. Our guest will be with us for about 45 minutes. I have to free him at 8 o'clock because he's in Strasbourg. He has a very busy agenda and a meeting even after, so we are on the clock. Afterwards, lucky you, I will stay online. We will be able to discuss, to debrief the interview together and have a general discussion. But otherwise, I will be asking questions. I've prepared everything. On your side, of course, you have a chat. So if you want to ask him questions, type it in the chat, and I will relay the questions to him if it's relevant, if we have time, etc., etc. Of course, I just reminded because I'm aware of the German context, it's a channel about the European politics, so the interview will be about European politics. So no question on the German elections, unless you want to you can relate something about the Germany and the EU, but again, just a small disclaimer on that. Otherwise, that's the gist of it. You know how it works. And on this note, we can start. Hello, Mr. Simon. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. So you heard me doing a small introduction, saying who you are, etc. Is there anything that I forgot that you would like to mention before we dive in the interview itself?
Well, good evening, first of all. Yes, you were right. My name is Sven Simon. I've been a member of the European Parliament since 2019, and now I'm the committee chair on the Constitutional Affairs Committee. So we work basically to keep the European Union's political system fair, effective, and fit for its tasks. I'm a member from Hessen, that is one of the Länders in Germany, and was born and raised there, then studied law in Germany and the UK, and became later a professor of international European Union and constitutional law, which I am still today practicing Monday morning. So this morning I was teaching public international law at Marburg University. You mentioned the political spectrum. I'm a member of the European People's Party. You said this is the right side of the plenary. No, it is not. It is the center. I'm right in the center, sitting right in the center.
Okay, center-right.
And the EPP calls themselves center-right party, but I myself, my seat is right in the center of the hemicycle, how they call it, and I see myself right in the center politically.
Well, since you mentioned that where you studied, what you do as a job, so you teaching law as a job prior to go into politics, and what led you to actually then go into politics and ultimately become an MEP? What's the story there?
Well, politics has always been a part of my life. When I was 11 years old, the wall came down in Berlin, and the Iron Curtain, which separated Europeans from each other. And that was a fascinating momentum. And I was always fascinated, and that was also part of the reason why I joined the Christian Democratic Union in 2000, the vision of Helmut Kohl that German reunification and the integration of the European continent are two sides of one coin. That was always fascinating for me. And that is also the reason why I was particularly interested in European politics. But I started, of course, not in the European Parliament. I was on a voluntary basis member of my local city council for 8 years. And then I don't exactly remember, I think 12 or 13 years also in my regional kind of a parliament. Not regional parliament, the parliament on the below level, so it's a local parliament in a way, but there's one layer above the city council. And 6 years ago, 7 years ago, the then Prime Minister, who is also from my city or my region, asked me that they would like to replace the member who was serving here in the European Parliament. And he asked me whether I would be would accept to be on the list, and then they put me on the list, and that was by then the lead candidate of my party, and I never regret this step. So I was interested in politics for my whole life, I would say, and then this step was not too far away. And since I also teach European Union law, there's also a connection between my academic part, life, professional life, and politics, even if the two worlds, the academic world and the political world, are totally different, I must say.
So today you are now the chair of the Committee on Constitutional Affairs, AFCO committee. So can you briefly explain what this committee is about and what is your job as a chair? Like, do you have any special power, any special influence on what's going on in AFCO? So briefly, what is it like to be the chair?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, on the Committee on Constitutional Affairs is like, I would say, the rules and structure team of the European Parliament. The acronym is AFCO, French abbreviation, and the AFCO, the Committee on Constitutional Affairs, makes sure that our internal rules and the rules for working together among EU institutions and member states are up to date and work well. So it starts with the rules of procedure. My committee is monitoring the rules of procedure, which means when there is ever a concern of a member or another committee where the interpretation of the rules of procedure is controversial, they come to us and we are in the lead of interpreting the existing rules of procedure. But we are also in charge of amending, revoking the rules of procedure. And another task is, for example, that we permanently review and propose amendments to the existing EU treaties. We are also responsible for the interinstitutional relations to a certain extent, at least when we speak about the agreement which exists between different institutions. The European Union has 7 different institutions. Beside the European Parliament, we have the European Council, the Council of the European Union, which is always a bit confusing. And then we have the Council of Europe, which is next door, has nothing to do with the European Union. We have the Commission, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, the Court of Auditors, and the European Court of Justice. And in the moment, we are negotiating. I do that together with my colleague from the International Trade Committee, the agreement between the European Commission and the European Parliament, because you must see that it sounds a bit weird. Why does the Parliament negotiate with the government, in a way, an agreement how to deal with each other? But that comes from history, that the European Parliament was permanently, since 1979, when it was elected, first time directly elected, fighting for more rights. And with this agreement, we also try to fight for a little bit equal treatment with the Council and have a fair treatment by the Commission. And then, for example, on the electoral law, we don't have, for the European elections, which take place every 5 years, a common electoral law. Unfortunately, it is highly fragmented, like the whole political discourse is highly fragmented. And we have 27 different electoral laws, and we have now passed already 2 files which need to be ratified or notified by the member states, which unfortunately hasn't been the case since, I think, 2008. 18, no, 8, I don't know, I don't remember. It's already quite a while ago. I was not in the parliament. 18, that's the right year. And the Spanish parliament didn't ratify it, or the Spanish government, unfortunately. Yeah, maybe that's it. Finally, the expansion and governance, assessing the accession of new member states and EU governance issues. So we have that treaty change reviewing thing, interinstitutional relations, electoral law, institutional reforms. Evaluating and improving the functioning of the EU institutions, and then the accession of new member states, and then all internal rules, including the rules of procedure. So how we organize ourselves, that's our task.
And as a chair, so what is your function, in everything, in all this?
Yeah, that is chairing the meeting, that is proposing the agenda, and then I have from each group one so-called coordinator that is in a way the spokesperson from the groups to that policy field. And we organize or we meet, I don't know, before each committee meeting, let's say, and we agree on the agenda, but I have the right to propose the agenda. Of course, they have to agree. So I organize the committee work. I work together with the staff and the secretariat of the committee, and I try to find compromises, since the European Parliament is pretty much a compromise-driven institution. So we negotiate a lot, even, of course, when majorities can take decisions. I chair the meetings. I am responsible for the outside world. So when people from other parliaments, national parliaments, come to the European Parliament and have a special concern on constitutional issues, I meet them. I'm usually the head of delegation when we travel abroad with the committee to find out how things can be maybe improved in Europe and learn from others. So that is basically the task of a committee chair.
So you just mentioned it, and actually just before this interview, you were participating to a negotiation about that. Currently, the Parliament is negotiating the renewal of an agreement with the European Commission. You're negotiating that with your colleague Bert Lange, with the chair of the International Trade Committee, sorry, INTA. So you mentioned one of the objectives of this negotiation is to get additional powers for the European Parliament. Could you tell us a bit, like, what kind of new powers or upgrade, let's say, of what the Parliament can do you're trying to achieve in these negotiations?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the one concern is how to deal with the situation that the European Parliament, different from most national parliaments, does not have officially the right of initiative, which means when we think that a legal act is needed to regulate something, or even worse, when we think that a regulation or a directive, that are the two main legislative files which we are dealing with, needs to be amended, the only thing we can do is write a letter or pass to the Commission or pass a resolution. The paradoxical situation is now that during the last term we came up with so-called initiative reports when Parliament in plenary decides on a legal file which we think the European Commission should come up with a legislative proposal. We did that 25 times during the last 5 years, and the European Commission came up with 24 legislative proposals. So the European Parliament is very successful, but we want to have that written down in this agreement, that the European Commission is always answering, coming up with a legislative file when the European Parliament's majority wants so, and maybe even more important, that is in a kind of innovation, that the European Parliament, when asking for an amendment, revoking, suspending existing legislation, and we have a lot of legislation in the European Union, that the European Commission is also coming up with that. Second thing is the European Commission has different opportunities to use different legal bases in the European treaties, because the European Union must only act when it has a competency which was transferred by the member states into the treaties. The European Union is not a state, so we cannot do our legislative work on everything we want, any policy, only when the member states have given a competence to the European level. And sometimes the European Commission in the past was deciding on legislative files on a legal basis where the European Parliament is not involved at all. So then it was only decided between the Council and the Commission. And we want to limit, at least create kind of sensitivity that the European Commission must use this legal basis only in very exceptional cases.
If I'm not mistaken, that was they used that during COVID and during the farmer protest last year, if I recall correctly. That was Article 122.
With the farmers' protest, I think it has there was no decision on this legal basis,
It was
which
a
was
different one.
connected to the farmers' protest. Maybe it was on the energy sector that the energy prices raised after the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and then in the energy sector, certain emergency measures have been taken to bring down energy prices and also to make the energy common market a little bit more functioning. But you are absolutely right. The so-called investment program, Next Generation EU, with 700 billion euros, first time such an amount of money as a common debt of the European Union. That was exactly the legal basis here was this Article 122. And we accepted that as Parliament, even if we are not involved at all, and 700 billion euros to be spent by the member states' governments, mainly without democratic legitimization, is indeed a problem. And that is addressed in this framework agreement. Or also summoning commissioners, that commissioners and the respective commissioner who is in charge with the precise policy field is present in plenary, in the committees, and also during the so-called trilogues, so that the question and answer time is another issue. And also when we speak about international treaties, the European Commission is in charge of negotiating international treaties, but the European Parliament was very successful in the past to be involved, to get information, receive information from the Commission during the negotiation, because when we speak about international treaties, accountability and democratic legitimacy is always, to a certain extent, a problem, because the government of the member states or the Commission of the European Union is negotiating those treaties, but parliaments usually can only say at the end yes or no. So we try to get involved and as much information as possible. And also in the normal legislative process, we want to get informed as the Council and the member states. And that is part of this framework agreement between the Parliament and the European Commission. It was, I know, very technical, but unfortunately sometimes the work of lawmakers is a bit technical.
It's technical, but it has very concrete consequences, because within everything that you just mentioned, one thing that is a bit behind is the idea, notably, that the Parliament increases its power and notably starts to get a bit more on an equal footing with the Council, which represents the other institution that represents the member states, and that's part of the principle that were agreed between Ursula von der Leyen, President of the Commission, and Roberta Metsola, President of the Parliament. Which makes the Council itself pretty unhappy. They were pretty unhappy about the principle, the idea that the Parliament would go towards an equal footing with the Council. And in the chat, people are asking, okay, but is it even possible that through an informal agreement with the Commission, the Parliament can become suddenly the equal of the Council? You don't need to revise the treaties to get the right of initiative, for instance?
Absolutely not. With this kind of an agreement between two institutions, we can not amend the treaties. It is, well, how can I a little bit better explain that there's no misunderstanding? For example, in her speech, inauguration speech, Commission President von der Leyen 5 years ago, she mentioned that she will seriously take into account and come up with a legislative proposal, or at least give a justification why not doing so, when a broad majority of the plenary asked for a legislative file. And when I speak about the summoning of commissioners, that commissioners are present, of course, we don't find anything in the treaty. When I speak about questions and answers to Parliament, how the European Commission is when Parliament makes use of its right of accountability, there's not much written in the treaty how the Commission should deal with those questions of Parliament. But the more sensitive part, this Article 122, of course, this agreement does not limit the Commission of using it, but more a little bit the soft power, the soft law, what we create here, that there is a greater sensitivity that sometimes already helps, that the Commission thinks another round and maybe explains better why they focus on this legislative file, or why they use a certain competence in the treaty and not another one where where Parliament would be involved. But indeed, we don't change or amend the treaties. It is just a document for working methods and good relations, fair treatment, equal treatment. But it doesn't change or amend the treaties. That's true.
So you would say the council is a bit overreacting when they criticize the willingness of the parliament to revise this agreement to include more commitment from the commission to submit a text when the parliament asks it, to justify itself when they use Rule 122 on excluding the parliament from the procedure. For you, there is no real basis on the complaints from the council?
Absolutely. But that's normal in European politics, that the competence and the institutions, it's always a power game. And when we speak about treaty reform, there are colleagues from national parliaments who would say, no, we don't want to have that, because they fear that they have less competencies after it. But there's enough power in Europe for all institutions. And there's one thing which we always should keep in mind: when we don't work together as Europeans in certain policy fields, we have to really improve and enhance our capability to act. Then I don't know how to translate the term. Is it church tower thinking? I don't know whether that exists. It would literally translate it. There's a German say that everybody thinks about his own church, but is forgetting about the broader picture of European interests. And when you think about how the world is developing, also from a demographic perspective, that the Europeans at the beginning of the 20th century have been 20%, made up 20% of the world's population. Today, that share has dropped to less than 6% and will fall below 5% by 2050. You can already see when we, for example, negotiate a trade agreement, that is also true when we speak about defense procurement or so. Then a country, a member state, even with the biggest population, Germany, my own country, with 1% of the world population, we don't have any say. The Chinese would only laugh about us. But when we come with a common market, 500 million people, and a strong economic power behind, then we can set standards in the world and fight for our interests by far more successful than a single member state would do. But sometimes, of course, member states have different interests, and that is also clear. And the governments and the executive of the member states want to be as powerful as possible, and that's a bit the part of the game, the power game between the institutions, because the Council of the European Union and the European Council, they are two institutions of the European Union, but behind them stand the member states. So it's more where they meet, and they want to keep sometimes power a little bit overseeing common European interest.
Let's talk a bit about, like you mentioned, the EU is a way to, in a global setting, to equalize, let's say, the relationship with giants like China, with India, or even the US. Currently, we're a bit in a period where the rule-based order is being challenged, and some even are even a bit more dramatic, saying it's dying. We're seeing the return of war aggression in Ukraine. We're seeing the US getting out of international organization, threatening everyone. We see the World Trade Organization being paralyzed, etc., etc. So, do you agree with this vision that the rule-based order is coming to an end? And do you think the EU is adapted to a more like confrontational, transactional, and bilateral order?
I think I wouldn't go so far that the rules-based order is coming to an end. At least we should fight for it as long as possible. But what is definitely true is that the perception after the Cold War with Fukuyama, who thought about the end of history, that the liberal rules-based democracies will prevail, and that the system of liberal democracy will be so attractive for the rest of the world that they all will take over. That is definitely not the case. The opposite is true. We see a growing of authoritarian regimes, starting in Turkey, Russia, China. We have a tendency in some Latin American states. So it is definitely not the end of history, the end of the Cold War. And we are quite struggling. And we have now systemic rivals in a way, because others are also doing not so bad. If you think about China, we don't like this authoritarian regime. We don't like how the freedom of speech and the freedom of press and the rule of law is treated in this country. But what is to a certain extent true is that they have been extremely successful in bringing 1 billion people out of poverty. And when we also remember the situation in COVID, I'm deeply convinced that in the long run, this liberal democracies with their system of responsiveness have dealt with this pandemic more successful than the authoritarian regime in China. But in the beginning, it was not so clear. And of course, it is for those authoritarian regimes to a certain extent easier to react on certain issues because democracies are slow. But the big advantage of liberal democracy is that we are allowed to criticize our government. We can vote for our government, vote them out of office. Here's a problem. On the European level, we cannot do that with European elections, with the Commission. But that leads to responsiveness of the system, and that brings me to the conclusion that liberal democracy will prevail over authoritarian regimes. But it is true that we have a systemic rival, and that the European Union, with 27 national governments, is not so much ready for this competition. And that is the reason why I think we must develop a new narrative for the 21st century. It needs to be a paradigm shift. The European Union was founded to ensure peace among its members, and today it must evolve into a geopolitical force capable of defending freedom and democracy, and this requires stronger defense cooperation, reinforced alliances, and a unified foreign policy that is independent yet aligned with Western interests and Western values.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the treaties. First, a question that came in the chat a while ago, but since it was related to treaties, I waited a bit. There was a question in the chat on what is the relationship between the ranking between the EU treaties, EU law, and national constitutions. Like, could the example is, could the EU overrule, for instance, the German debt brake that is currently in the German constitution, or is it limited by EU competency, and so the constitution prevails over the treaties? So what is the relationship actually between the two?
It started with an international treaty, which means that the European Union is based on mainly two international treaties. In international treaties, the sovereign states, national states, give competencies to another level. That is basically the Treaty on the European Union and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. And at the very beginning of the European Community, by then, which is today the European Union, the European Court of Justice gave a ruling, that is the famous Van Rent en Loos and Costa NL decisions, and they argued that the European Union is an institution of international law sui generis.
Of its own type.
Meaning that it is supranational. It is not an international institution, but a supranational institution, with the consequence that the law taken by or established by passed by the European Union, namely regulations, have direct effect to not only the member states, but also individual citizens. With directives, it's slightly different. First of all, they have to be transformed, but if they are not transformed timely or in a proper manner, then they also have kind of direct effect. So that means EU law and also the treaties are directly applicable in the member states, which is usually not the case with international law. And from this, the consequence comes that the European Union is a supranational institution, and that was also coming from the rulings of the European Court of Justice, that European Union law prevails over any national law, including national constitutional law. So whenever there is a conflict between national law, also constitutional law, and European Union law, the European Union law prevails.
But because that was the member state agreed to that transfer, it's not the EU that decided, oh, your constitution put them say. It's the state who agreed, I'm giving you that competence so that it becomes common.
Yeah, I mean, the member states agreed in the treaty, but it was the ruling of the European Court of Justice. And after that ruling, the member states still agreed. Yep. It's not written expresses verbis in the treaty. There is a little protocol which says that the Lisbon,
they acknowledge,
to the Lisbon Treaty, that where the member states agreed as the masters of the treaties, we apply European Union law as supranational law, which prevails over national law as ruled by the European Court of Justice. That's not the exact wording. I think it's not mentioned that European Union law prevails. They are just referring in that protocol to the rulings of the European Court of Justice where this was established. It's a fascinating thing that I don't know whether that was in the mind of the masters of the treaty when they established the European Union, but it was such a convincing institution in the beginning when they were fighting for the common market, and when we think about the idea of the European Union, namely long-lasting peace. That is still the biggest aim of the European Union, and we are quite successful in doing that. The idea was in the beginning and to put together the coal and steel industry under a supranational control, because they wanted to make sure that Germany cannot produce coal and steel and start another war against Poland, France, or any other member state or other state in Europe. And they established a supranational authority which controlled the coal and steel production of any member state, the 6 founding member states, France, Germany, Italy, and the Benelux states. And this supranational authority with supranational power, also legally supranational power, is today the European Commission. But the member states, in the end, after the rulings, accepted that European Union law prevails. But it's sui generis, it's very special in international law. Usually we don't have that.
Last year, when Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made a speech in the European Parliament in July to convince MEPs to vote for her and then to accept the result of the vote, she did mention that she believed the time had come for treaty changes. But since then, she hasn't said anything further. She said, okay, we will need treaty changes, but that's it. Do you think it's realistic to expect a reform of the EU treaties this mandate? So before 2029?
No, to be very clear, to be realistic, I think we to a certain extent, I think we need a treaty change. That is true for both policy fields where we need to act, coordinate us better. I will briefly mention which I think, but also institutionally, we would need an institutional reform. The EU must overcome stagnation in its reform process, but there is no appetite at all in the government. Sometimes a window of opportunity in history opens. I thought such a moment would have been the war against Ukraine, but not so. I don't see that in the capitals of the member states the appetite was growing. But what is definitely also clear is when we speak about a defense union, a common procurement of our defense products. It's a huge waste of money what we do. 80% of the weapons we delivered to Ukraine were bought outside the European market, which means mainly in the United States. It's a huge waste of money that we don't work together, that we don't develop and produce weapons together, that we don't have a common market here. Also, when we speak about the energy union, German policymakers have done the most stupid energy policy of the world during the last 20 years. So we rely now on nuclear energy from France and the Czech Republic to keep our carbon emissions targets. But we don't have a functioning energy union, energy market. Or when we speak about digitalization, sharing data, it's really a problem that we are lacking behind. And when we speak about technology, sometimes our market is simply still too small. And here we have problems. So in those policy areas, we definitely will need, and also foreign policy, if we speak with one voice in the world, we have a say. If we are totally split, we don't have a say. Like now, maybe Donald Trump is negotiating with Putin over Ukraine, but Ukraine as a European country, even they want to join the European Union, but the Europeans don't have a big say in foreign policy because we don't speak with one voice. That is a problem too. So what I could imagine is that we learn lessons from the debates during the last 5 years on treaty change. There is no appetite. The heads of state and government don't want to touch it. We are far away from any kind of majority in nearly all national parliaments and the European Parliament as well. But what we can think about that those member states, like a coalition of willing, go one step further for a deeper integration in certain policy fields, as we did with the Schengen area, the Schengen Treaty, which means no passport control when we cross borders, or with the euro. Not all member states of the European Union also have the euro as currency, and not all member states of the European Union are members of the Schengen Treaty, where they abolished the passport control. So in this direction, I think we must lead the discussion that we need in certain policy areas, definitely the next step of integration from the size of Robert Schuman, but that will not be a treaty change, definitely not within the next 5 years. I'm relatively sure about that. Unfortunately, I think we would need it, but that's my political opinion.
I'm looking at the time, so I know you have to go at 8, so I will ask you a final question before you go. So you just mentioned it's unlikely there's going to be a treaty change during this mandate. But do you think that in the perspective of the future enlargement of the EU, we know that Ukraine wants to join the EU, we know that the Balkan countries are in the waiting line, etc., etc. Do you think that the enlargement will force the end of the member states to change the treaties, because the EU is already having difficulty functioning at 27 with 30 plus members, especially if we have a big member state like Ukraine that is joining, they will be forced a bit to change things around.
Well, with each enlargement in the past, we always had a treaty change. But to be honest, yes, it is true when we speak about foreign policy, when we speak about unanimous voting in council, that it blocks us, that it hinders us. But we also must see that we have, particularly when we speak about foreign affairs, national sensitivities, emotions, traditions, which are very diverse. So we would take the risk to blow it up. It is true, on the one hand, it's a bit a dilemma, but I think we should not focus on treaty change. And if treaty change hinders us to accept other states which want to become members of the European Union, then we block to a certain extent ourselves, and we already treat some member states who would like to join the European Union in an unfair way. When I think about some states on the Balkans, which made really progress, and we put another obstacles in their way to join the European Union. And then this vacuum is definitely filled by the Chinese or by Putin, and we can definitely not have an interest here. But maybe we should focus more on consolidation, and that the European Union is, in a way, again, more convincing for more people. The European Union is generally accepted by the vast majority of the most of the populations in the member states. But I think when we would focus on policy fields, when we speak about technology, on getting rid of bureaucracy, overregulation, and when we focus on competitiveness, and when the citizens, the people see the added value of European integration, then they are also more fascinated by this institution and better explain the institution. Then there is maybe room for a treaty change, but I wouldn't also necessarily see the connex between enlargement and treaty change, even if it is true that all enlargements were combined with a treaty change in the past.
Well, thank you very much, Sven Simon, for taking the time to answer our question. It was very interesting. Chat, do make sure to thank him for his time. You can follow him on X. I put a link below the video feed. Mr. Simon, if people have to remember one thing about tonight, what would be your message to them?
Fight for the European Union. We need the European Union to defend ourselves, to defend our values, namely to live in liberal democracies where the rule of law prevails, and this is not self-continuing. There's no guarantee, and each generation has to fight for democracy and for the rule of law, and the European Union is the best which was ever invented by the Europeans, so it is definitely worth it for you to engage pro-European. And we need in each generation people who fight for the rule of law, democracy, and our shared European values.
Well, that's very clear. So thank you again, Mr. Simon. Good luck for your next meeting. Chat, stay here because we're going to debrief. So yeah, thank you very much, and have a very good evening, Mr. Simon.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, chat, tell me everything. Up, I'm ending the call and we can start the debrief. Up, I'm moving things away. There we go. All right. As usual, I was like, oh yeah, 45 minutes. We can. I have time. And so I have like a full page of question, and I asked, I think, a bit more than half the question I wanted to ask, but yeah, that's part of the game. You get into it, etc. There's the inevitable question from the chat as well. But yeah, it was an interesting conversation. We covered most of the topics I wanted to discuss tonight. So that was good chat. Are we happy? Are we unhappy? Let me know. We're going to cover like the main topics that we discussed tonight with Mr. Simon. Debrief them a bit, and of course it's general discussion time. So if you have stuff you want to talk about, you have the chat and we discuss. That's the point. So as a reminder, Sven Simon is the chair of the AFCOM committee, the committee on constitutional affairs. As he says, it's weird. No? It has historical reason. Like if you look at a lot of the acronyms of the committees in the parliament, a lot of them derive from French. Like Committee on Constitutional Affairs, it's AFCO, which is short for Affaires Constitutionnelles. And you have a bunch of code for culture. Well, in English it works as well. The Committee on Women's Rights, it's called FAME. So you have a lot of acronyms that are derived from the French because historically French was the leading language in the architecture, the structure of the institutions. So yeah. Funny story on why you have sometimes acronyms that don't look like the English words. His answers were 90% EPP talking. He's EPP, so he's not going to say something that is not EPP. There's a bit of a logic there, a little bit of a logic. Where was that? So yeah, he's chair of AFCO, so he's the one who is leading the committee, is leading the agenda, is leading the meeting itself. Doesn't mean that he's the one deciding on everything. He's presiding, he's representing the committee to the outside. So when the rest of the parliament wants to talk to AFCO, they talk to him first. But all the decision making. He participates too, but it's mostly done with and by the coordinators. It's a function that he didn't mention, who are like he said the spokesperson slash leaders of each political group. So within each committee, you have MEPs from all the political groups: EPP, Socialists, Liberal, Greens, etc. And each group will elect a coordinator, leader, and that leader will be the one like leading the work for representing his political group and leading the work there. He will be the boss, so to say, of the MEPs of his committee, and he will be representing them, negotiating with the others on their behalf, and that's a position that is very important. It doesn't you don't hear it often outside of the parliament or outside of Brussels, but it is arguably one of the most influential positions you can have inside the parliament. Let's see. But 45 minutes global interview format does not let much room for deeper development. I mean, you could see both ways. Normally the interviews are 1 hour, 45 minutes. Yeah, it's a bit shorter, but still keep in mind that 45 minutes or in an hour are very long formats for politicians, etc. Like the thing is that on Twitch, in the format that I do, also because it's online interview and it's via Zoom and everything, it favors longer responses. Normally, an interview with an MEP would be 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes maximum. And with answers that are like really back and forth, etc., an MEP will not have time to go into the kind of details that Mr. Simon and pretty much all the other MEPs I invited over the years go into. So it's also a question of style and style of the interview that is doing like that. But I think that in 45 minutes we did cover quite a bit. There's always you always want to cover more, but that's a balance to keep. If you let them, they will. Yeah, well, that's the principle of politicians. If you let them speak, they're very happy to speak. That's the very principle of an MEP. Like the joke usually is to say, if you leave an MEP with just a piece of paper and three points, like 3 bullet points, it will last an hour just over that, just repeating them. Like I had story time. I had a colleague back when I was in parliament. So his MEP was someone who was she was always going on loops, and so he was making like a speech, literally like a 3-paragraph speech, and that she would do in committees. So basically 3 different points, 1 per paragraph. And she would go on, she would be able to speak 45 minutes, basically looping every single paragraph together. So she will 1, 2, 3, then 3 to 1, then 1, 3, 2, and she was going loops after loops after loops after loops for 45 minutes. And the funny thing is that once you notice that, you could not unsee it. Like after my colleague like made me remarks, hey, you know, like when she speaks, she's always repeating and going in loops, and I could not unsee it. Like every time she was speaking, I would see the loop going on, and we would make jokes with my colleagues about that to the detriment of the MEP. But that's sometimes some quirks of MEPs who do things. Everything is connected together pretty much, but sometimes they go on a thing. They go on a thing like that, and like for most people, they don't even see it, they don't even notice it. It's very funny once you notice it. You're like, but you're just going in a loop, and people will go out of a meeting where the MEP said the same thing for 45 minutes. Oh, that was very interesting. There was a lot of things there. No, she said 3 things over and over and over and over again, just in different shape and form, but exactly the same thing, which I find funny, but it's very like typical of MEP politicians. They all do that, and also when you're an assistant or people who are around politicians and the same politicians often, you will remark that they get speech patterns and point patterns, in the sense that they will all there are things, there are like points, there will be stories, there will be things that they always repeat. Like every single, maybe not every single meetings, but like very regularly, if you go with your MEP, the MEP will always tell the same stories, always the same arguments, etc. Because that's things that they have learned, that it's stories, it's arguments that they think can work well with people, and so they just repeat them, and that allows them to go, let's say, on in an automatic mode from meetings to meetings. Like if they do public meetings, once they have let's say their template kind of speech, they pretty much like they can go everywhere and they will just recycle that speech, those speaking points, those stories, with a few adding new elements, some bits of news, etc. But that allows them like to be very autonomous, very for a long time. But for assistants who follow them, like you always hear the same story. You're like, oh, he's going against with that story. And at some point, you stop listening to your own MEP because you know what they're going to say, even if you write the speech and everything. So where was I? So yeah, AFCO committee. See, I'm going on the rant already. So from Mr. Simon's perspective, it sounds like his job is mostly about ensuring that the current EU system works as defined, with one specific force to get more power from the parliament. That is mostly it. But committees are specialized. It's specialized body of the parliament. AFCO, it is built, it is designed to work on rules. It works on the rules of the institutions. So the rules of the parliament, how does the parliament function on a daily basis, how the EU works, how the treaty works, how the relationships, what are the rules define the relationship between the parliament, the commission, the council, and everything. So that is their focus. So the big part of what he does in AFCO is indeed about this, because that's the focus on this committee. Just like in the agriculture committee, well, they will talk about agriculture non-stop, because that's the point of it. So yes, that is mostly it, even if you can put a lot of things behind, because like behind things that look very boring, like rules of procedure, agreement, framework agreement with institutions, etc., you have actually a lot of political stakes behind this. And that is very important, and that's why also you have MPs who specialize in that and are passionate about what they do, because they see the political stakes behind the thing that they do, and well, they're enthusiastic about it. They are convinced of the points that they're making, and yeah, you spend 5 years on this and you become an expert in these things, etc., etc. So, for instance, in AFCO, the big thing there is to increase the power of the parliament. How do we make sure that the parliament becomes more powerful as an institution? So, for instance, in the treaties, you read the EU treaties, the parliament does not have the right of initiative. It cannot propose new laws. Only the European Commission could propose a new law. Only the commissioners can decide, okay, I will propose a regulation, a directive, etc. The council cannot, the parliament cannot. Only the commission has the monopoly over that. And that's why at some point, at the beginning, he was saying the fact that the European Parliament does not have that power of initiative is one of the big difference between the European Parliament and a national parliament or a classic parliament. Like the European Parliament is missing some of the key powers that traditional parliaments have. For instance, the right to initiate law, full power over the budget, and the power to change the constitution. Those things are elements of a national parliament, of a classic parliament, that the European Parliament does not have. Why? Because the European Parliament is derived from international law. So it's a bit linked to the nature of the EU itself. That being said, if you look at the history of the EU and the Parliament is the institution that has increased the most in terms of power compared to what it was at the very beginning. And as he said, and that I didn't know initially, so Parliament doesn't have the right to say, okay, I'm going to make a law. I'm going to make a directive, I'm going to make a regulation. That being said, you have soft power, the ability to influence. So what he was saying, and that's a stat that was actually interesting, in the Parliament during the last Monday, they said, okay, we cannot initiate law, but what we can do is we're going to do reports, initiative reports. So initiative reports is texts that have no legal value. It's basically the Parliament giving its opinion. This is what the Parliament thinks about this topic or that topic. That's it. You do with it whatever you want. But they have a procedure where they say, okay, sorry, we are asking officially the Commission to adopt a law on that specific thing. So they will say, one of the examples, for instance, is the directive on minimum wage that came initially from the Parliament. It's the Parliament who made an initiative report saying, this is what the Parliament thinks about the idea of a year EU rules on minimum wages, and we demand that the Commission does that. And what he was saying is that the Parliament in the previous mandate, 25 times they made a report asking for a law to the Commission, and 24 times the Commission followed suit and said, okay, we're going to propose a law on the topic that you want. So it shows that even if the Parliament does not per se have the right of initiative, through its influence, it's able to nudge the Commission, say, hey, do a law on that. I want you to make a law, and the Commission say, okay, fine, I'm going to do the law. So that's why, like, sometimes I tend to say that the fact that the Parliament does not have on paper the power does not mean that it's powerless. Something I say that always piss off the French is when I say that to some extent, MEPs are more powerful than members of the French Parliament, to some extent. Even if they can't propose law, they are to some extent they have much more power because they are much freer to do what they want. They will an MEP will never have a commissioner calling him pissed off and telling him you're going to withdraw that amendment or I'm ruining your political career. The MEP, he will just laugh, say screw you, and I'm doing what I need. I'm doing what I want. The pressure that can be put on MEPs is much less than what MPs can be subjected to, because also sometimes you have a hierarchical relation between the MPs and their government. In the Parliament, European Parliament, since the relationship between the Parliament and the Commission is a bit more distant, there's more independence. It's more complicated for the Commission to put pressure on individual MEPs. Let's say, an individual MEP, random. You take a random MEP. That random MEP will likely have more power, more influence individually than a random national MP. Of course, I'm not talking if you take the head of the party or the spokesperson of the party. I'm talking like really you take run-of-the-mill MP, he will have probably less power than an MEP. So that's why I'm saying that it's not because the Parliament does not have all the powers, the European Parliament does not have all the powers of a national parliament, that it's automatically less influential, less powerful than a national parliament. Does that make sense? How many laws are proposed by the Parliament in France? In Germany, the Parliament has the right of initiative, but the vast majority of laws are proposed by the federal government. That's pretty much the same in France. The MPs have the right of initiative, but in the wide majority of cases, that's the Parliament, the government that will be the lead. Actually, a lot of the laws that are proposed by the French Parliament, individual MPs, either they end up being rejected, they end up being removed, or they end up like just being repackaged into something that the parliament, the government wants to do. Also because, well, this specific French parliament is a bit less the case, but in a traditional French parliament, Fifth Republic, if you're not part of the majority of the government, well, you can make all the law proposals that you want, they will never pass. So you even have less power, even if on paper you can propose a law. But that's not something that they necessarily... you missed him. He left 20 minutes ago. But don't worry, you'll be able to watch the replay. So yeah, not because you just you have the possibility to make a law that you're automatically more powerful. Especially since, like, going on, I'm staying on the French example and promise I'm leaving that side afterwards. Especially also because you have the question of the means. An MEP has more means in terms of money, in terms of staff, than a French MP. French MP has a budget of what, 10,000 euro, 12,000 euro, something like that per month to pay for his team, so his assistants. An MEP has 25,000, something like that. So more than double the amount that a French national MP has. So that means that the MP has a bigger office, he has more offices, etc., etc. He has more time. So that means that an MEP is able to recruit more staff, better qualified staff, more technically expert staff than, let's say, the regular French national MP. A lot of assistants in France, in the French National Assembly, they work part-time, or they're just out of the university, or they are mostly there to do communication, to do political stuff, etc., etc. It's close to 30,000, maybe with inflation. Yeah, maybe it's with inflation now it's 30,000. So yeah, it's even more. But an MP with a constituency directly elected is politically more powerful than one who got his place on the party. Yeah, but then you can you can discuss that. I'm talking about institutional power, like political power, like the influence in the constituency. Yeah, that's another story. But I'm talking like raw parliamentary power. Like I remember, like when I was an assistant, sometimes we would do meetings with assistants from the French Senate, from the French National Assembly, and it was a complete cultural shock because when they were realizing that we had a much better status than them, that we were much more technically experts and everything. Like it was like literally like as if it was two completely different jobs that were facing each other. Just use AI. Well, good luck to have an assistant replaced by an AI. I don't think we're there yet. Anyway, long segue. What were we talking about before all this? Sorry. I have co-committee and the agreement. So yeah, the parliament is negotiating a new deal with the commission to try to get some additional power, some additional promises from the commission on how they function, how the relationship work and everything. And that piss off, of course, the member states, the council, because when they see the commission promise to the parliament, yeah, okay, we're going to treat you like the council, and we're going to give you a sort of backdoor right of initiative. Council, who does not like the parliament at all, gets very angry. The member states are not happy at all about that agreement between the parliament and the commission, because they see that as modifying the treaties behind their back. Like they're saying, The Parliament does not have the right of initiative, so the Commission should not be promising to the Parliament, yes, whenever you ask for a law, I will do a law. The treaty said that there are procedures where we can basically leave aside the Parliament and just do the law between the Commission and the Council. You cannot, via this agreement, reintroduce in the loop the Parliament, because that's not what the treaties are saying. So there's, as he was saying, there's power politics and constant fight between the Parliament and the Council on who has the competence, who has the power in the overall power balance of the EU. And the Council, so the institution that represents member states, is by far the most powerful institution in the EU. By far, that's why it's always very funny to when you have people saying, "Oh no, the EU is terrible. It does things against member states. It's the Commission that is imposing stuff." Yeah, no. Actually, no. There's nothing that is happening without the member state wanting it. The member states are driving the EU. The EU is only the reflection of what member states want. So there's nothing that happened in the EU that member states did not agree to. That's a bit absurd as an argument. So, member state, the Commission is against the member state cannot do anything. They're being bullied by the mini EU. No, the EU is doing what member state wants the EU to do. So. Depends which states. Well, even so, if all the powers of the EU are given by the member states. The EU can act on something because the member states agreed to give that competence, to give that power to the EU. And again, if a member state does not consider that the EU is not serving its interest anymore, a member state can leave. Brexit. It was literally the UK saying, we're not happy with the EU anymore, we're going to leave. All the others said, that's fucking stupid, but okay, you do you. Article 50 is there. We're not keeping you in the EU against your own will. They're coming to regret that decision. I kind of want to say, we told you so, but there's nothing like nobody is a member of the EU, nobody is part of the EU against its own wishes. Even countries that are heavily critical of the way the EU function, if they want to leave, they can leave. And the Commission is only doing what they want, what they were told to do by member states. Where was I? So yeah, you was declining, explaining what they want to do. So more right of initiative, more how can I say it? Better oversight on the way. So I was telling you before about the special procedure. So Article 122, I think, of the treaties, that says that in some circumstances, in special circumstances, in emergency situations, the the Commission and the Council can decide to make an emergency procedure, to make a law, without asking the Parliament. So normally, when you have a law, the law has to be approved by the Council and by the Parliament. They have to agree, they have to do a trilogue, and then that does a new law. In some circumstances, the Commission can decide, okay, we need to go fast, so I'm doing the law without consulting the Parliament, without like having the Parliament being formally part of the process. I will do it just with the Council. That's the Rule 122, which again there shows again that the Council, the member states, is the dominant institution. Yeah, that's the right expression in English. Yeah. And so that's a procedure that was used during COVID when they did the post-COVID recovery, the post-COVID recovery fund. So he was saying that the 750 billion euros that were borrowed on the markets and everything to finance the economic recovery of the EU. that was done with an emergency procedure. Same thing was mentioning energy when there was the energy crisis in 2022. The EU activated that procedure to go fast, to be able to go extremely fast to take measures. And Parliament agreed to it because they say, okay, that's important, but yeah, I'm not very happy. And so now what they want to achieve is that, okay, if the Commission uses that special procedure that moves aside the Parliament, they have to let us know in advance and they have to justify it. Like they have to explain why it is necessary legally for the Parliament to be moved aside for that decision to be taken. And potentially like de facto influence the scope of what is in this law. So again, Council not happy at all because they see that as a way of Parliament to get influence on the content, despite the treaty saying that they're not supposed to do that. Where was I? And final point, yeah, summoning commissioners. So of course, the oversight over the commission. Technically, the commission answers to the parliament, and so when the parliament wants to summon a commissioner, the commissioner needs to come. They need to answer questions from the MEPs, and so that's how do you make sure that commissioners are basically on call whenever the parliament needs it. What else did we talk about? Treaty changes. It was crystal clear. So as I was saying, so you if you look back at the speech of von der Leyen in July 2024, she said at some point, I think, so when she's campaigning to become again president of the commission, so she's explaining what she will do if she's re-elected. She said at some point, yeah, I think the time has come for treaty changes. We need to modernize the EU. So Parliament applauded, and that's it. Now, what does that mean? She said, okay, I'm okay with treaty changes. Does that mean that we're going to have a treaty change? It was very clear on saying, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen because there is no consensus between member states. Any treaty change can only be done with the agreement and to the extent that member states agree to. And the problem is that member states currently are heavily divided. They are heavily divided on the direction of travel that the EU should take. To take a very concrete example, good luck putting on the same page on meaningful EU reform. On the one hand, Emmanuel Macron, who is very much pro-EU integration, and on the other hand, Viktor Orban, who is very much against a deepening of the EU and would rather go back to EU of nation states, etc., etc. You have two completely different, if not opposite views of the EU, and from there, that makes it almost impossible to change the treaties because member states are simply not on the same page on what they want to do, what they want the EU to become, and that means that they are stuck. That's why member states currently they're never talking about treaty changes. They're not talking about it because they know they're divided. They know they can't get in an agreement, and so they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to look divided. Like for instance, the Parliament has been asking for I think a couple of years since 2021. I think they've been asking officially no, maybe not 2021, a bit after. Maybe 2022. Anyway, doesn't matter. The Parliament has officially asked the Council, so member states, to reopen the treaties. Say, okay, we need to change the treaties, open them, let's negotiate something. So there's a formal request. Normally, the Council is supposed to answer that request. Council is not answering it. It's not even acknowledging it at all, because they know that they don't have an agreement between them, and they don't want to give the idea that they are not united. So instead, They put the topic under the rug, and they pretend it doesn't exist. Do you think that if Orban gets voted out in the next election, something might change? Maybe. Again, Orban is the most emblematic, let's say, blocker of a treaty change, but he's not the only one necessarily. And sometimes other countries are happy to hide behind Orban to justify not having to talk about this. So if Orban gets voted out, for sure there will be a discussion again. There will be a push for EU treaty changes from the parliament and everything. Will there be a complete game changer? Not certain. If Fico is still there, it would be weakened without Orban, but would he still agree to a treaty change? Not sure. What would Meloni agree to? She would probably be open to some changes, but to what extent? Whatever happens in Romania. So it could facilitate at least a discussion. But again, it's not like the only factor. What would a new treaty entail? It would entail whatever the member state wants. If the member state decide to open the treaties just to change one sentence, that's going to be the treaty change. If they want to rewrite everything from top to bottom, they can rewrite everything from top to bottom. Member states have pretty much unlimited powers whenever they decide to reopen the treaties. As long as they agree among themselves, they can redraft how they want, and that they go through the process of ratification and everything. So in a number of member states, that would mean referendums. That's also a factor. Sometimes you have governments who are like, okay, even if myself I would be open to a treaty change, I'm not sure my population would be voting in a way that I would like. People keep in mind the 2005 referendums, the French and the Dutch no, that killed the constitutional treaty. So that's also a factor. There's also, in a way, national politics. It's not just the member states or the governments and the European Parliament and the Commission that do things on their side. Then you also have national politics. You need to build a national and a European consensus on the need for treaty change and on the content of treaty change, and be able to explain those. I insist on explaining those, because if you look back at 2005, there was clearly a failure to explain what was this reform. Like people in France, for instance, people were convinced that they were voting on Turkey or on Polish plumbers. That's what people thought they were voting on, even if there was nothing about Turkey, there was nothing about plumbers inside the treaties. Would the entry of Ukraine help? That's what I tried to get him to talk about. He disagreed with the idea that the enlargement would have an impact. Let me explain why some people mention Ukraine particularly, but also enlargement. And particularly Ukraine. A country like Ukraine joining the EU would have consequences on the EU itself that would be extremely important, just because of the size of the country. It's not Malta, it's not Cyprus. It's a huge country, and it could destabilize a bit some aspects of the way the EU is functioning. It's not necessarily about the treaties, but it's more about EU policy, the EU balance of power. So for instance, Ukraine is a huge agricultural power. Huge. If they join, that means that from one day to the next, a big part of the EU agricultural fund, about 30% of the EU budget, would go to Ukraine. Because they are such a big country, such a big agricultural power. And so countries currently that are very much beneficiaries of, or get a lot of money from the EU for their farmers, well, they would get far less than now. Same things, money that goes to regions to help them catch up economically. Take most of the, well, not maybe most, but a good bunch of the Eastern European countries. They are huge beneficiaries of EU funds, notably regional funds, because their regions are poorer than Western Europe, and so they need to catch up. And that's one of the leading reasons why a lot of countries in the East are net beneficiaries. They receive more money than they give to the EU. Ukraine joins, especially after the war. It's going to be, many of the regions are going to be much poorer than even poor regions in the current Eastern Europe. So that means that the money would move away from Eastern Europe to Ukraine. And so countries that are currently net beneficiaries could become net contributors. So it's a country the size of Ukraine joined the EU, which upsets the balance of many things. That doesn't mean that, like I said, this is not linked to the treaties, but the impact, the institutional impact, is still important. And so a lot of people are thinking, okay, the new member state coming is the opportunity to change adapt things so that when Ukraine joins, it doesn't wreck everything. And then we also need to address some issues that we're having, for instance, in foreign policy. That's something that MEP Sven Simon acknowledged. Currently, we have unanimity system for decisions on foreign policies or security, which to an extent could be understandable because it's primarily national competence, and that is very linked to the sovereignty of states. So you can only act if everyone is agreeing. But as we saw over the past few years, that leads to a lot of issues. For instance, you see with the sanctions on Russia or the help with Ukraine, where you have one country, in particular, Orban, not to name him, who is holding the other hostage or preventing one majority of the others to move the EU in one direction because, well, they don't want to. On EU defense, same thing. So there is a push, a willingness to get rid of the vetoes in some policy areas, for instance, foreign affairs, to move to a majority system, which is the default majority system in the council. Ukraine is quite rich, you know. They have great tech and everything. Well, they have tech, they have rare earth, but they are not super rich. They're not rich. I mean, especially after the war. I mean, the amount of reconstruction, etc., that they will have to do. No, Ukraine will be not exactly the in the top 5 of the richest countries in the EU. Far from it. Even if it has resources, that's potential, etc., that's for sure. But having the potential doesn't mean that you're automatically, right now, a rich country. Yeah, I mean, like you said, farmers probably not looking forward to the to Ukraine joining. I mean, probably without the war in Ukraine, farmers would be dead against Ukraine joining the EU. Because for them, like, it's a huge competitor. They would take away, like, a huge competitor economically. They would take away a lot of money from the EU funds, etc. So no, the European farmers currently, they're definitely not in favor of Ukraine joining. Like, politically, they can't say otherwise because there's the war in Ukraine, etc., etc. But yeah, deep down, they're not big fans of Ukraine historically. Yeah, I think there will still be farmers in 2027. Jeff, you can relax. Anyway, all that to say that treaties are probably not going to be reopened during this mandate, but he said, yeah, we have an alternative to this, which is instead of trying to reopen the treaties, we do what we did with the euro, with Schengen, meaning that a group of countries within the EU can decide to go further than the others. The other can catch up if they want, but those who are voluntary can go further and say, yeah, that's one way we could go forward without having to rewrite the treaties or be blocked by potential vetoes. So let's say that a group of member states want to go further on defense, they could together create a mechanism, an agreement where they are allowed to go further than the others in the field of defense. So there are alternatives, there are ways to do that, which leads a bit to the idea of multi-speed Europe. So multi-speed Europe is the idea that layered EU. So some countries can go further than the others. And those who want to stay, let's say, at the basic EU level, they can stay at the basic EU level. And the other can still go ahead. That's an idea pushed particularly by Macron, among others. And so that way you don't need deep treaty changes. Those who want to go further, they can go further, etc., etc., etc. Some member states absolutely hate the idea. Eastern Europe detest the idea of multi-speed Europe. Why? Because they see this idea of a multi-speed Europe, or the idea that you could have a pack that goes further than the others, as a way to isolate them. For them, they see, oh yeah, basically is going to be the Western, Northern Europeans who will do their own thing, and we will be left behind, will be second-rate Europeans. And because they are the rich countries, well, they will do new fancy funds for themselves and will get nothing. And so you have this deep-seated fear of becoming second-rate Europeans. They keep the memories of the Soviet Union where they were second-rate citizens, etc. You have this deep fear that they would be left behind by the rest of the by the original 6, the original 12, and that it's a way to ignore them. Say, oh, you're not happy? Fine. We're going to, us the Westerners, us the Northern, we're gonna go further. And leave you behind. In the end, the fact that you don't agree doesn't really matter to us. So that's the one of the reasons why a number of countries, Eastern, Central Europe, etc., are very, 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 very opposed to the idea of a multi-speed Europe, or very skeptical about the idea of some countries going further than the others, without the others. At what time horizon will Ukraine enter Europe as a full member state? Depends of course on how the negotiations go, etc. of the war and everything, but if it happens in 15 years, that's already fast. Given all they have to do, even if they are very willing to do it, given all the political difficulties and everything, 15 years for me that's the minimum. And even so, that's not guaranteed, because again, you have technical conditions, but Ukraine could fulfill every single conditions if inside the EU member states are not ready politically, because that would mean there would be referendums. And if this referendum could be negative, member states are not going to want to risk it, and so they will just wait. They will not do it. Keep in mind that the Balkan countries, they've been in the waiting room for 10, 15 years as well, and they're still negotiating. Which creates other problems, because you have growing frustrations in the Balkan countries who say, okay, so you want us or you don't want us, which also feeds the fact that the renewed push for enlargement. But it's not something automatic. Like, when Ukraine says, oh, we're going to join the EU in 2 years, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Forget it. Like, most likely the country that will enter first the EU will not be Ukraine. It will probably be Montenegro or Albania. They are the most advanced countries in the enlargement process. Turkey, the negotiations are frozen, so nothing is happening right now, and it's never going to happen. Like Turkey, I'm convinced Turkey is never going to enter the EU. The only reason the process is not just cancelled is political and diplomatic. It's just because nobody wants to take the blame, wants to be the one taking the initiative of putting an end to the Turkish integration process, and everyone has an interest in maintaining the illusion. The Europeans have an interest in maintaining the illusions because they don't want to look like the bad guys, and that gives them some means of pressure on Turkey. They want to maintain like good relations, economic relations, etc., etc. For Turkey, they don't want to get rid of the enlargement process to join the EU because it allows Erdogan to say to his the liberal parts of Turkey, oh, no, look. The EU is still something we could achieve in the future. He has still a strong interest in getting EU money, in getting EU trade, this sort of thing. So everyone knows that it's a dead process, but everyone has equally an interest in pretending that it's going forward, or it's at least it's not cancelled outright. So nothing's happening, and most likely nothing will ever happen, even if Erdogan moves away. If Erdogan goes away, I don't think it changes anything. Again, because of internal political reasons. Because again, if a country wants to join the EU, not only you need to have the okay of the Commission, you also need to have the okay of member states. And in a number of them, that means a referendum. Good luck on a referendum in France, in the Netherlands, in Denmark, on getting people to agree to Turkey join the EU. Good fucking luck. So, yeah, no, Turkey, I don't see it happening. There's no... Yeah, but the Turks himself know that it's not happening. Again, everybody knows it's not happening, but everyone keeps pretending because they have some advantages in doing so. Switzerland does not want to join the EU, so problem solved. So yeah, next wave of enlargement, most likely Montenegro, Albania. Most likely. Iceland could become a candidate. Yeah, they used to be a candidate. Then they cancel without really canceling, and there's going to be elections this year. Oh wait, did the election really happen in Iceland? I'm confused. Iceland elections. They already happened, and the new government is more open to EU integration. And there's a possibility that Iceland could ask to resume the integration process to join the EU. But again, there would be big negotiation and everything, so it would take time. Even if, like, politically, it's not as toxic, let's say, or complicated to sell to people than Turkey or Ukraine. Yeah, Israel dream, that's not going to happen. I'm not even sure. They will not be even eligible to join. So even if Israel wanted to join the EU, most likely they would be told, no, you can't. Because you're not European. Because they're not part of the geographically they're not European. Like in 1987, Morocco asked to join the EU. Morocco, the Kingdom of Morocco, officially asked to join the EU. They made a formal request, which took all the member states by surprise. They were not anticipating it, and they say, "Oh, well, no, because you're not Europeans. You're not on the European continent. The European Union is for European country. You're not on the European continent." And so they changed the treaties. It was not in the treaties back then. In the treaties, that's not something that they anticipated. It was not in there, and so that's why they were taken by surprise when Morocco asked. And so they said, "No, thank you for the offer, but no, we don't want." And so then when there was the next change in the treaties, they amended the treaties so that they would say that to join the EU, you have to be a European country. Of course, the definition of Europe is there's no official. You will not find a geographical definition of Europe in the treaties. So it's left blurry voluntarily, because also it leaves some political margins of maneuvers to member states. But now in the treaties, you have the idea of the principle that to join the EU, you need to be geographically European. And then you have all the other criteria, which are called the Copenhagen criteria, which are more technical. But yeah, you have this argument. Then again, it's subject to political interpretation. Some people argue, well, Cyprus? Is Cyprus European? I mean, it's literally just in front of Israel. Is it geographically European? There, the argument was, well, it's an island, and historically, culturally, that's very much linked to Greece, to the European continent. So they decided that Cyprus fulfilled the geographical criteria to join Europe. Georgia, there's a very strong argument. So Georgia, who is applying to join the EU, officially they have the status of candidate country. So the member states said, yes, you could become member state. So they did not reject it on geographical ground. So according to member state currently, Georgia fulfills the idea of it's a European country. You look at the map. I will do it right now to show you. Up. Don't move, don't panic. Everything is under control. There we go. Just need to adjust things. Okay, so sorry, right now we're in Brussels. So let's unzoom. Europe. Good. So Cyprus, as you can see, that's some ways from continental Europe. Still, it was considered to be a EU country because culturally, historically, it was very much linked to Greece. Georgia is there. A number of people would argue that Georgia is actually Asia, Minor Asia, not European. Even if you look at the commonly accepted geographical definition of Europe, it does not include Georgia. Like, if you go on the wiki of Europe, you look at the geographical map of Europe, it stops, like, it includes the very northern part of Georgia, and that's it. Like, he goes Ural, tac, and he stops there. Israel is closer than Georgia. So there's a very strong argument in saying that Georgia is not really geographically a European state, which again tells you that even if you have a principle in the treaties, it is kept blurry so that it's open to political interpretation. They did not want Morocco. Georgia, maybe we'll take it. So again, all these concepts are heavily malleable. What else? I mean, yeah, we talk about the treaties and everything. Yeah, okay. What time is it? Oh, 9. We're doing good. Any questions on your side? Otherwise, we'll slowly conclude. And yeah, have dinner. Enjoy an evening of tranquility or whatever, and that's it. What's my phone? Why are you freaking out, phone? There you go. All right. I don't see questions, so then that means we can conclude. We can conclude, kids. So, I hope that you enjoyed tonight's interview. It was very interesting. The restart of the political interviews of the season. I'm in discussion with more MEPs to get more interviews and everything. So expect more. It went well. I hope that you found it interesting. For tonight, that's it. Tomorrow, yes. The next time I see you, tomorrow, for the news review at 7 in English. Then it's going to be on Friday at 5 for the news review in French. And no interview next week. Why? Because I will be on top of the news review. I'm doing another show in French on Arte. But for you, that's not very interesting. It's in French, so it's not very relevant. It's a show that I'm doing once a month and everything. It's cool. So if you speak French, go check it out. So yeah, apart from that, I hope that you enjoyed it. As always, if you like what you saw, well, drop a follow if that's not already the case. If you have a Prime lying around, toss a coin to your streamer. That's always appreciated. And otherwise, I wish you all a very good evening, and I hope to see you tomorrow or next week. Bye everyone, have a good one. Bye.